Throughout the latter 2010s, there's been this natural progression of water motifs included in the adaptations or spin-offs of Persona 3. And I mean the ones that solely focus on the P3 cast. So no, not the Q games or something like P4 Arena, but the Persona 3 movies and Dancing in Moonlight. And now that the Persona 3 Reload trailer is officially out, there's no longer any room for doubt that Atlus is deliberately associating Persona 3 with water symbolism. Even the animation for the reload part of the logo comes in like a wave. Now, I've seen some takes that simply find the water a cool match with the blue color scheme, while others think the trapped underwater image really nails the somber, depressing vibe. Those things are important, yes. But in this video, I'll be making the argument that this water stuff goes way deeper than that, and that actually, the moon, time, memory, Orphism, and Christianity, concepts that are all indispensable to Persona 3's identity, are all deeply connected to water. And by diving into how these things are connected, we may be able to figure out what Atlus is doing with Persona 3 Reload. Update, so I've been working on this video for nearly a week, and Faz just uploaded a new Japan-only commercial that only adds more fuel to my theory. Don't worry, you'll see. I'll also be covering the Japan-only Persona 3 club book from 2006, the last chapter having introduced an entirely new cosmogony for the series' universe. One that can even be retroactively applied to Persona 1 and 2. So not only did P3 revolutionize the series with all new mechanics that have defined modern Persona ever since, but Hoshino and his team also completely revamped the series via its lore. There will be major meta layers to this analysis and speculation video, so apologies in advance that the structure of this theory is going to be pretty wonky at times. A handful of my viewers asked if I could leave some non-spoilery sections in this, so I've done my best to provide some semblance of satisfaction for both the entirely new players and also those who are P3 veterans. So this upcoming section will be the only one that's free of any specific spoilers. It lays some important groundwork for later parts of my theory, but it's also generally enough for newcomers. Be aware of the timestamp shown on screen though, cause that's when all spoilers start being fair game. I'll throw in one last reminder right before we hit that point just in case, but now it's about time we finally dive right in. Alright, so let's start breaking down some of this trailer for both old and new players alike. So here we see Gekkokan High on our first day of school, April 7th, the same exact date that Vanilla P3 starts on. I'll be including some of the additionally released footage of P3 Reload where appropriate, by the way. Seeing all these marble columns and the flooring realized in this engine is amazing, and adding on the mosaic tile, this entire design stays faithful to the same old Greco-Roman architectural influences. This is huge since Persona 3 places heavy emphasis on Greek mythology when it comes to the party's personas, and the elements of Greek tragedy in its narrative. I even did an hour-and-a-half long analysis on Persona 3's ties to the Greek mythos that you can check out in the cards if you'd like. By the way, you're gonna hear me say Greco-Roman blah 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 a lot in this first section, and I just ask you to please bear with me since this sets an important foundation for later parts of my theory. Now, after we cycle through some lovely portraits of familiar characters, we arrive at this shot of the entirety of Gekkokan High. I love how grandiose it looks from this perspective because, again, notice the white columns and vast size resembling that of the ancient temples like the Parthenon that ancient Greeks built for their gods. A very fitting aesthetic given how at night the school turns into Tartarus, which was most commonly depicted as the lowest depths of the Greek underworld, with some tellings placing it even lower than Hades itself. And speaking of Tartarus, it looks like the massive ascending tower has returned with all its many floors, something we'll return to in the Orphism section later. And yeah, the Orphic mystery cult is quite important, in no large part thanks to MC's initial persona being none other than Orpheus himself. The trailer also gives us a glimpse of Polonia Mall. Now, I personally find that the Greco-Roman influence has been drawn out a bit with these new reload models, most notably the arches on all the second-story windows. These very types of arches were the foundation of the Roman Empire's architecture, and a significant reason they were able to expand across so much of the world. And a certain religion that was established within this very empire is something incredibly important I'll circle back to later. Now, the next major thing to note in this trailer is that
Kenji is back.
Taking a look at this date here, April 22nd, this is the exact same day with basically the same dialogue too, from rank 1 of his OG social link. This was an automatic SL initiation in the original game, so as of now, especially given what Wada has said about not including content from Portable, it looks like Kenji has returned as the Magician SL instead of adding in one for Junpei based on FemC's route. Editing lady here, so a few days after I already wrote and edited this part, an interview from the Reload team confirmed that the SL characters have remained the same as the original game. Meanwhile, male party members will get some sort of additional side stories in place of SLs. It's honestly very important to the aesthetic that someone like Kenji returns, actually. You see, one of the main characteristics of Greek tragedy is the tragic hero and the tragic flaw, one that's responsible for said character's downfall. The most commonly depicted flaw being excessive hubris, or in other words, pride. So going off of that, it's quite significant how the hardships many of the social link characters face are either directly caused and or greatly exasperated by their own actions. This is contrary to many of those in Persona 4 and 5, who were seen more as victims of circumstances outside of their control. Meanwhile, the original P3 route featured much less sympathetic and even outright unlikable characters, because of their so-called tragic flaws, especially kids like Kenji and Moon Boy. Like, just consider this. They could have easily chosen to not bring these kinds of social links back. So why would they deliberately do this but to uphold P3 stylistically and thematically? So to sum up this section, Persona 3 is extremely consistent with the Greco-Roman inspiration, from the architecture to the characters and their stories. And you can bet this framework is very much there for a reason. This lets us drift on to all the water imagery, though unfortunately those of you who don't want spoilers for original P3 story are gonna unfortunately have to disembark here. Again, final warning, spoilers ahead for rest of the video! So water is shaping up to be something prominent in Persona 3 Reload. Like, just look at these transitions and the in-game pause menu featured in the official announcement. Then the opening scene from the newest Japanese TV ad just sells it further. As I already mentioned in the intro, there's been an increasing amount of water effects like ripples and bubbles added to Persona 3 focused content since the later 2010s. Here are just some examples from P3 Dancing's opening. Water vapor is a huge effect throughout, especially with how it's used to highlight this hyper-stylized movement of the characters in action. Something that was especially noticeable to me though was the protag ascending the staircase with this completely underwater background, with the aesthetic returning in later scenes like the one with Ken. Now, I can't help but draw an even deeper connection of the MC ascending while underwater to the new Japanese commercial. And a big reason is due to how this kind of image is symbolically reminiscent of the Christian concept of baptism. Something huge we'll talk about later, but not quite yet. Before that, I'd like to draw attention to these beautiful pools of water, reflections, and ripple animations that show up at the beginning of the third movie, and during the fourth movie while the MC is recalling all his memories of the past year. Seas is also depicted in a myriad of bubbles during MC's last talk with Ryoji before he goes up to the moon to face the true Nyx, her real form being closely tied to the ancient Greek cult of Orphism, which we'll really get into later. Trust me guys, all the symbolism is there. Now I'm gonna do my best to boil down this water connection into two main segments in this video. The first will focus on the moon and real-life lunar calendars and other timekeeping methods, and the second will focus on Orphism and Christianity, the two most prominent religions when it comes to influence on Persona 3's ending. So let's begin by clarifying how water is connected to the moon and time. Perhaps the first thing that comes to mind when you hear these words in the same sentence is how the moon's gravitational pull affects the ocean's tides. These tides depict the cyclical reality of day in and day out, and going off of that, ancient Greek and Roman societies made use of lunar calendars to keep track of the year, with months beginning at the first signs of a new crescent moon. And as we know, Persona 3 heavily revolves around a lunar calendar system. Major bosses arrive at every full moon, meaning the latter serves as a countdown and marker of the passage of time in the game. There's also tons of other clock and timekeeping imagery, from the clock in the Velvet Room to the ones in the Tartarus lobby. There's one right outside the entrance and even one at the top of each block. Plus, a clock counts us down to the dark hour, an hour of each day where time stands frozen. And building off that Greco-Roman foundation from the previous section, ancient Greece also heavily relied on water clocks. Yes, devices that used water to keep track of time. Various other cultures from around the globe made their own versions of these water instruments, but it was a Greek inventor in particular, Ctesibius, who created the hydraulic clock around 200 BCE. This invention used a siphoning system and was the most accurate clock in the world for nearly 2,000 years until the invention of the Dutch pendulum clock in 1656. Anyway, the point I'm getting at here is that all this clock imagery perfectly fits P3's cultural aesthetic, and that also thematically, the game has always been focused on the concept of time. Fate and Memento Mori are intimately connected, of course. I mean, the very first passage you see when you start up P3 is, quote, "Time never waits. It delivers all equally to the same end." And you can bet Persona 3 plays around with the concept of time with every new iteration of the game. P3 Fez made it possible to save Chidori, yet Junpei in the answer definitely makes it sound like she's gone for good. And the entire epilogue story itself takes place in the abyss of time, a single day that has remained completely frozen for the P3 cast. Then Femc's route made it possible to save Shinji from being shot. Though what I find even more significant about Portable in relation to my major theory is how its exclusive opening mentions a certain particular phenomena twice, the butterfly effect. For those unfamiliar with this concept, it basically proposes that small events can have a ripple effect that causes much larger events to occur. In other words, small changes can eventually add up and lead to significant changes in outcome. If you don't encourage Junpei to visit Chidori in the hospital, she will actually die. And as for the Femc route, if you don't find Shinji's pocket watch and return it to him, he too will die for show. So yeah, what more do you need to demonstrate the butterfly effect? And so, I just want you guys to keep in mind all those ripple and bubble scenes that made it into the final two Persona 3 movies and P3 dancing. Sorry, I said this theory was gonna be weirdly structured, so now I'd like to go over the production timeline of all the Persona 3 projects of this past decade, along with some Atlus interviews, since my conspiracy goggles can't help but look at all this and think, Potential meta-level evidence that Atlus has been building up to P3 Reload all along. So beyond this 2022 survey of Most Wanted Remake, this past week Wada confirmed that multiple annual Atlus surveys have seen P3 as a top result, so they've known this was wanted for a long while. What really sticks out to me though is Wada saying the idea for P3 Remake has existed at the studio for quite some time already, so presumably something that staff themselves were interested in. It just wasn't until 2019 that they could finally begin working on it. This interview details how grueling 2017 to 2019 were for the Persona team due to juggling 3 projects all at once. The P3, P5 dancing games being one, Royal another, and Q2 being the third. So there was no way they could have started a P3 remake any earlier. And speaking of Wada, he has a very interesting connection to all the modern Persona games, but especially Persona 3. You see, his first chief designer role at Atlus was for the base P3 back in 2006, and he reprised that role for Portable. Wada was also the main producer and director of P4D, and expressed interest in doing a P3 dancing game if it was successful, and actually went on to produce the subsequent P3D. So what am I getting at here? Well, it means Wada was clearly around to greenlight the water motifs in the opening, even if they were done and conceived by a separate animation studio as is detailed in these interviews. As always, links below. I think this train of thought goes for the last 2 movies as well, so even if this water stuff did not originate or was intentional by Atlus at first, it's not out of the question that the Reload team decided to work with it going forward. But the biggest significance of Wada to me is that not only has he worked on all the Persona 3 related titles, but he's still around while folks like Hashino and Sojima left P Studio all the way back in 2016. I can't help but think someone in Wada's position who has been with Persona 3 from the very beginning may have had a continuous creative vision for the IP. Because interestingly enough, every new iteration of P3 we've had, Atlus built on the story or added something substantial, whether it was additional epilogue or a different perspective. This is true of base P4 to Golden and vanilla P5 to Royal as well. That's why it'd be odd to me if the team under Wada's supervision didn't have something up their sleeve for Reload aside from the entirely new engine. And don't get me wrong, I recognize how much hard work went into building this alone. But that brings me to this point. So as you must have seen by now, there's been a tidal wave of backlash after it was confirmed that Fez's epilogue and Portable's FemC route would be omitted. As a longtime fan of Persona 3 myself, I get that a definitive version of the game was the most requested thing in a potential remake, and I do feel bad for all fans who were really hoping for this. But the way some recent interviews are worded have piqued my interest. Now, Wada said that while there is no answer in FemC, there are new events and scenes to help recreate this Persona 3 experience for modern day. And now let's add what Reload's director, Ryota Nizuma, said. Quote, "From the proposal stage, we had the key word, resurrection, in mind for this title. The entire team worked on this with the idea that it would not be an evolution of Persona 3, but rather a deepening of it, and I am sure we have succeeded in creating a deeper dive that won't betray fans' expectations." So, Noisy Pixel includes an intriguing translator note. Deepening and evolution, while they share the same hiragana, have different kanji associated with those words. And by the way, this interview was released via the written word. So it seems Nizuma tried to do a play on words, which if you're in P3 Reload theory crafting brain rot like me, you can interpret that as kinda cryptic, no? I mean, look at those final words. "I am sure we succeeded in creating something that won't betray fans' expectations. But surely the team knew that people were asking for a combined Fez and portable version for years, and yet they decided to take both those things off the table. It's quite striking how confident they seem to be that we will still enjoy this game, even if it's only base Persona 3, supposedly. Alright, I'll finally stop beating around the bush like I have for the past 20 minutes. I'm proposing that the title Reload is more than just a smart reference to the EVOKERs, and that we are actually gonna be symbolically reloading a New Game Plus, or the story, so to speak, in a manner similar to Final Fantasy VII Remake or the Evangelion Rebuild movies. The opening underwater cutscene from the newest commercial is one of the biggest reasons why I think they're messing with time in some way. Faz noticed that the apologetic third line is only from the original recording of Yukari's dad, but the line right after, "I am to blame for this," is from the false version Ikutsuki edited. Not to mention, the music that plays is creepily reversed with these ruins all around, but then the way we break the water surface where everything is right side up again and we see Aigis on the beach and Memories of You starts playing properly and like, does this remind you of anything familiar? Now before you leave, hear me out please! I have faith in Wada's team, seeing how they handled P5R's third semester. Wada wanted to lean a bit more into, let's call it, player interpretation? Something we'll return to. But seriously, believe me, I've made hours and hours of Persona 3 video analyses on why the original themes are so damn good. In fact, the first video I've ever done for YouTube was defending Fez, okay? But water, memory, and time shenanigans are also symbolically tied to P3, and I'll get to that, but just to clarify, I personally don't think they'd go so far as to completely retcon the original ending, especially since so much of the Reload dev team are Persona fans thanks to P3 all those years ago. However, thanks to Orphism and Christian symbolism, I do think there's room to remain faithful to the original ending, yet still shake things up. This leads us to the Persona 3 club book and its potential meta significance to my theory. Sadly, this book was never officially translated outside of Japan, but thanks to XComp and especially Nenaline and her blog and lore videos, we can begin to understand how much of a trailblazer Persona 3 really was for the entire series, and what that might mean for Reload all these years later. So, did you guys know Nyx is a planet in the Persona universe? Yeah, she's a planet. An alien one with a soul who is a star eater. She ended up crashing into Earth billions of years ago, and while her soul merged with life here, the remnants of her physical body was enclosed on the moon. Those of you who are familiar with the giant impact hypothesis likely see where Hashino's team got their inspiration from, mimicking the supposed real-life Thea, named after the Greek Titan, by the way, which crashed into Earth billions of years ago, the debris from the impact coalescing into our moon. The craziest thing about the Persona-verse version of this is that Nyx also is the mother of all shadows, and we learn specifically from Persona 5 that shadows are an integral part of all humans. No one can survive without their shadow, a la Okumura and the other off-screen deaths of Akechi's prior victims. So, to summarize this in the least insane way possible, Nyx's soul, aka her psyche, ended up merging with life on Earth. This caused a desire for death due to us wanting to merge back with the remnants of Nyx on the moon. To combat this yearning for death, humanity ended up creating the collective unconscious in resistance. So in other words, humanity's constant struggle against Nyx's spirit telling us all to go die is what actually caused us to evolve as a species and develop complex psyches of our own. Meaning, as per this world guide, Nyx is not some manifestation of a collective thought along the lines of the other gods in this series, like Yaldabaoth, Izanami, or even Nyarlathotep. She is conversely an almighty astronomical entity from outer space, and without her, none of these other gods in Persona would even exist, since she is the shadow of all shadows. Her soul has merged with all of humanity's shadows. All these other deities in the Persona series, then, are manifestations of humanity's self-destructive thoughts and tendencies. So even though these 30 pages of the club book are never directly stated in the games, all this lore, even retroactively with P1 and P2, matches up. But seriously, I highly recommend checking out Nenaline's video and her translation of this. But okay, so Nyx is some planet and blah blah blah. Lady, please, what's the point of all of this? Well, I just find it fascinating that it's this very Persona 3 club book and lore that set up the cosmogony for the entire Persona series up to this day. And to quote something else from the recent P3 Reload interviews, Wada said, "Reload was both a remake of an important work which made the Persona series what it is today, and a new challenge for the development of the Persona series in the future." So could we be getting something as pivotal as what the original P3 and its club book achieved back in 2006? The Nyx avatar we fight in P3 looks like this, but the actual Nyx, the final boss form once we're teleported up to the moon, is an egg. This egg in particular is based on the world egg of Orphic cosmogony. And remember, the protag's initial persona is Orpheus. In Orphic teachings, Kronos, the entity of time, and Ananke, the entity of inevitability, birthed this cosmic egg, which then hatched Phanes, whose daughter was Nyx. And from Phanes, the universe was born. Now, Persona 3 takes some liberties with this tale, of course, but given how faithfully Atlus has drawn from Greek mythology for the characters' personas and each one's subsequent role in the story, I don't think it's out of the question that P Studio could be, once again, turning to the same mythos and religious beliefs to inspire a twist on P3 Reload. On a related note, you know how Atlus is known to add a third semester to their games a la P4 Golden and P5 Royal? Well, most of us vets view the answer as P3's version of this, right? But given how it's not gonna be in Reload, it makes me curious if perhaps they might be making use of the month of February instead, and that whatever might go down could be the reason why the answer is no longer necessary, at least to Reload's base story. This thought finally, at long last, brings us to Orphism's main connection to water. The initiated are taught that once they arrive in the afterlife, they must take care not to drink from the pool of Lethe, or forgetfulness, but from the pool of mnemosiny, or memory. And remind me again, what happened to the entire party between January 31st to March 5th? I'd like for you to sit on that thought, since it's important to my final prediction section. Now, something else to note is that the river Styx, so again, water motifs, is the passageway to the underworld, and we know that many times in the Greek mythos, Tartarus was referred to or associated with this. It's said that the ancient Orphic cult got its teachings from Orpheus, the legendary hero who descended into the underworld in an attempt to recover his wife Eurydice. And though he was unable to bring her back, he himself returned. Long story short, Orphics believe in reincarnation, that each soul goes through 10 cycles of death and rebirth. And going back to that underwater ruins scene, I think it's interesting to think about this journey to hell and back concept from a perspective of this being some kind of New Game Plus timeline, or just an alternative one. The protag died in OGP3, right? but is now journeying through Tartarus once more, perhaps. Now, all this talk of rebirth also brings us to Water's connection to Christianity and baptism. This varies based on denomination, but the original method a la the Bible is via immersion. This is when your entire being, including your head, is submerged underwater, then brought back up, like so in these examples. Jesus Christ himself was baptized in this way, so remember the in-game pause screen, guys? Imagine looking at this all game and realizing in hindsight that we were being prepped for a resurrection ending all along. The protagonist's connection to Christianity is undeniable, right? Given that he becomes the messianic figure, the savior of the Persona verse. His ultimate persona in the credits is confirmed to be Messiah, and his pose in the answer just adds to the image. Now, the original Greek says that Jesus died for humanity's sake, descended into Hades, or i.e. the grave, then was resurrected 3 days later. Sure sounds similar to Orpheus's trip to Hades and back, no? So, going back to baptism, this is viewed symbolically as being born again. And just look at all these depictions of going underwater, then coming back up in these reload trailers. Especially not in a face-down manner, but a face-up one, just like the immersion process. Plus, the Latin text we see could be a clue hidden in plain sight. Now, excuse my pronunciation, but Ora Tenebrosa, dum Spiro Spero, Renascere is Latin for during the dark hour. While I breathe, I hope to be born again. Could this be the main theme or motto of Reload? Just as Memento Mori was for the original P3? Now, no doubt this would be the biggest change they could possibly do to the story though, and the ballsiest move P Studio has gone for in a long time. So how can we possibly arrive at this supposed resurrection ending without undermining original P3's themes entirely? Like, I get it, I'm rather worried about a changed ending myself. But I think it's worth noting that death, while still a vital part to Orphic and Christian beliefs, is not the end-all be-all to them. A huge chunk of P3's Memento Mori message isn't just a reminder that death is inevitable, but how understanding this actually frees us to live, encouraging us to make the most of every moment because time waits for no one. Likewise, the story of Jesus doesn't just end with him descending into hell, since the resurrection aspect is just as important. Water just further captures the same dichotomy between life and death. Nearly every culture on Earth views it as this fearsome thing that's the cause of so much death and destruction due to things like shipwrecks, storms, tsunamis, floods, etc. But it's also revered as the giver of life. No human on Earth can survive more than a handful of days without drinking water, and no food would grow without it. That's why I think all these depictions in the Reload trailers are supposed to convey more than just a drowning or depressed feeling. This brings me to the final section of this video, the actual predictions I have for Reload's story. If it really is incorporating some kind of twist, I think there's ample room to build off Elizabeth's story from the Arena games. Of the entire Persona 3 and 4 cast, Elizabeth feels like the only one who truly has specific, unfinished business to take care of. Her biggest wish is to free the protag soul from the Great Seal, and Margaret confirms this if you defeat her in Vanilla P4 and Golden. But something that particularly stood out to me is when she says this about Liz.
Even if there isn't time enough in a single era and it takes her eons, she will accomplish her mission.
What's more, in Elizabeth's story mode in Arena, she awakens to the Fool Arcana. Yup, the exact same wildcard potential that all the other protags awaken to. Basically, Liz's story in the Arena games is her being reminded of how powerful the bonds a wildcard makes truly are, even though she's already witnessed a miracle back during the journey. Going back to the Margaret fight in P4 and Golden, she says Elizabeth told her if she couldn't do it alone, she'd combine her powers with those who bonded with that soul to create a miracle. That soul referring to the P3 protag, of course. So with all of this laid out, I think there's a way to incorporate Elizabeth into the main story more, make use of the month of February, and save the protag from his ultimate fate, all without completely undermining Persona 3's themes. So, on an awkwardly related note, the P3 Club book describes these things called plumes of dusk, which are fragments of Nyx's body that fell to Earth once she fused with the moon. They essentially have the same space-time manipulation abilities as shadows and the world they come from. So just think about how the Dark Hour works, all as a result of the Kirijo group's experimentation with these plumes. Now, interestingly enough, the only way to get one of these as a usable item in-game is from Elizabeth herself. Well, to be fair, they are given out at the start of easy mode, but fulfilling a certain request of Elizabeth's in Fez will award a Plume of Dusk no matter what difficulty you're playing on. So, did I say timeline shenanigans or what, guys? Now, here's where the real hypothesis begins. Perhaps Elizabeth somehow resets everything back to April 7th, or if not a reset, some kind of altered timeline. Again, there's already setup for this with the even if it takes more than a single era kind of language. Since we have additional scenarios, events, and side stories in Reload, maybe they're incorporating Liz into the main story more, or if not that, then maybe through optional events with C's, something akin to Marie in P4 Golden. The trailer shows that some dates like Kenji's auto-initiated SL has stayed the same, but it also teases at a new event and/or activity a la cooking with Yukari. So going back to the butterfly effect, all these little differences can lead to lots of tiny ripples, which together can really cause a disturbance in the pool that's Persona 3's story. I do think Shinji and Chidori's deaths will remain, and that the Nyx fight on January 31st will still play out in the same fashion, since it's a vital conclusion to the protag's own story, and newcomers to Persona 3 need to have that experience. But instead of C's forgetting everything about the Dark Hour afterwards, I think they'll actually remember the year, which cues the month of February. Going back to Elizabeth starting her own journey as the Fool, perhaps the purpose of this new Reload timeline will be more for Liz to build up her own bonds. I'm not entirely sure how this will be incorporated, and it may end up being more of an off-screen implied thing, but ultimately I think she'll have to attain her own universe/world arcana to pull off a miracle on the scale that she's seeking. And remember, she'll combine her power with those who forged bonds with that soul. But I can see Liz, maybe misguidedly, asking C's for help in either defeating Erebus or going back to challenge Nyx once more. She'll summon some sort of time-manipulating dungeon, similar to the Abyss of Time perhaps, except way less grindy and having full access to the compendium from the start. And as to avoid rehashing the Answers plotline completely, and don't get me wrong, I loved its story, I think via Elizabeth and the Plume of Dusk perhaps, somehow C's will be reminded of what they already learned from that previous or alt timeline. Remember, drinking from the pool of memory, not forgetfulness. So maybe they'll actually be trying to stop Liz from retrying the Nyx fight. Little do they know, though, is that our Velvet Room resident is going into all of this knowing that, if she must, she will take the protag's place, freeing him at the cost of herself. Seeing how the ending of Persona 3 already has biblical themes in it, including the likes of John 15, there's no greater love than this, that a person would lay down their life for the sake of their friends. I think Elizabeth taking the MC's place strikes a fine balance between a happier but earned ending. The Velvet Room attendants exist between mind and matter. There's no indication that they are mortal like humans are. Yet Elizabeth learns via the P3 protag the joys of life and the tenacity of the human spirit. And if she's also able to interact more with C's in Reload, then those are just additional friends whom she'll wish to save. Going off of Arena, her wish to defeat Erebus for good is unfortunately naive, and I think her story will come full circle in a bittersweet but meaningful way if it ends with her realization that Erebus will always return, meaning someone will have to take up the Great Seal. Elizabeth making the decision herself to take the Protag's place will also be never explored opportunity for a Velvet Room attendant. Not only did she experience human life having gone through her own fool's journey to attain the Universe Arcana, but instead of always serving under Igor's leadership or even the Persona Protag, she'll have had the opportunity to decide her own fate. By the way, I don't think knowing the Arena games will be necessary to get Reload's story if they go the Elizabeth route. I have a feeling it's gonna be more along the lines of, if you've played Arena, you'll have additional insight, but whatever necessary info we may need from these other games will be incorporated right into Reload. So earlier I brought up how the answer may not be necessary anymore, right? And well, that's due to all of the above. And honestly, the ending doesn't even have to be something as monumental as resurrecting the Protag outright, but something as simple as the entire cast remembering everything instead of forgetting until it's too late. Perhaps giving them time to cherish the final moments with MC and actually say their goodbyes, so even if March 5th stays the same, they'll have the closure they didn't get prior to the answer in Fez. Or maybe Elizabeth will figure out how to relieve the Protag's soul from the burden of the Great Seal, even if it means he isn't actually coming back. But speaking of changes to the ending, this brings me to what Wada said about their approach to P5 Royal all those years ago. They wanted to avoid coming off as too preachy, instead doing their best to establish the new ideas naturally. With that said, I think whatever changes we may see, like anything major involving Elizabeth, will be optional throughout Reload. So if a player doesn't want the change to Vanilla P3, they don't have to trigger it, much like how Royal handled Akechi and Maruki. Now remember how we went over all of P Studio's development cycle earlier? I'm probably reading too much into it, but I get the feeling they've wanted to continue Arena's setup for a while now, they just haven't had a chance to. Understandable given the need to capitalize off the Persona 5 success and hype. But seeing how Wada was also involved with the Arena games, maybe Reload has finally given the studio that opportunity to continue where they left off. Wada said in the 4Gamer interview that usually, after the team finishes a game, there's still lingering doubts like, could we have done more, or will everyone like this? But with Reload, the staff really feels like a good product has been made. It just gives me those ultra-confident vibes that any creative person hopes to have after fulfilling their unique creative vision. That even if the reception is polarizing, they themselves are proud of their work. And going back to how the original Persona 3 was trailblazing for the series, I think the resurrection ending of Reload could factor into that whole development of the series in the future quote from Wada. So please take the following with a grain of salt, but a couple leakers who ended up being right about Reload and P5 Tactica say some kind of party game involving all the Persona Protags, including 1 and 2 apparently, is in the works. It's also the company's desire to expand the Persona series in new ways, and I know that sounds pretty vague, but I can't help but think it'd sure be easier to include the P3 Protag in things going forward if he was alive in at least some alternative timeline. It's also worth noting that the Japanese audience and just the East Asian audience in general loves the protagonists. Like, look at all these poll results. So because there's so much love for this character, I can't exactly knock them for trying to bring him back for fans. Anyway, to start wrapping up this long-ass video, I get that the interviews say they're really just working with base Persona 3, so definitely keep that in mind. But I also think it's the smart move to not reveal your entire hand or put the twist right on the box. Like, if things end up going in a similar way to what I laid out, they still technically wouldn't have been wrong about the answer and portable stuff not being included. But yeah, what do you think the water motifs symbolize? Is my Elizabeth prediction too much of a crazy fanfic-like change? Or are you actually kinda sold? Is it compelling at the very least? Please let me know in the comments. I'd also love to hear what predictions you may have about P3 Reload. Also, please like this video if you liked it, and subscribe for more. I'll definitely be keeping up with the updates Atlus will be releasing every full moon, and I'll alter my predictions as necessary. Check out all my other Persona analyses and follow me on my other socials. Finally, I want to thank all my patrons, especially Big Clingy, Sam Bezjak, Francesco Santoyo Rego, M. Meownalin, Platinum Rose, Malcolm Lowry, Unholy Biscuit, Leviathan8685, Peter Shepard, and Andy.